environments that we cannot access, that we cannot reach? How do we understand that distance? How do we bring that into ourselves? Yes.
Hi, everybody. This is Victoria Vesna, and you're listening to Vibrations Matter. I talk to artists, scientists, and everybody who's interested in light, sound, and frequencies. Join me. Okay, so here we are.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi, Yolande. I
Mhm.
was actually reminiscing, going through the back of my head, trying to remember when we met. And I just could not pinpoint it because it's been that long.
It
It's
has been that
it's
long.
been that long. I just know for sure that the moment we met, you were telling me about some project that you were doing with sound. And it was going to be performative. And my very first impression was you and sound and performance and location. That I remember. Where, when, how? A blur. Do you have any memory of what?
Well, well, you're right. It has been a preoccupation of mine for forever, this sort of this area around place and sound, location, how we move through the world. So the first time I met you was when I was working on this project that I was developing in Amsterdam at the Netherlands Media Art Institute, and it was called Sun Run Sun.
That's right.
Yes. So that was
That's
the
right.
project about um, satellite sounders, it was called. It was working with GPS technology, which was just coming in at the time. It wasn't yet on the phones, and that
So
was
what year are we talking about?
2000, 2007, 2008, something like
Wow.
that. Yeah.
The financial crash.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah. So that was about, thinking about how we move through the world and how thinking about celestial navigation and GPS satellite navigation and turning live data from the satellites into sound to create these kind of sonic spaces or sonic experience of navigation rather than a visual one.
And how did the title come about, Sunrise Sun?
Sun Run Sun is an old technique. So decided I needed to learn prior technology, prior to the GPS. And so I learned how to navigate using the sextant and the stars. So celestial navigation. And one of the techniques that you learn in there is called Sun Run Sun. And it is a technique where um, you take a bearing from at the couple of hours before noon, at noon when the sun is at its zenith, and then the same couple of hours after noon. So you have these three that you can compare, and that technique is called Sun Run Sun. That's where it came from. And I just loved that sort of, I mean, when I think back, it's really a connection to our planetary scale, if you like, our relation to,
Right.
because I was, looking through the sextant, you're observing the sun. I mean, you can't actually look at it. You're looking through these lenses that are filtered, but you're observing the position of the sun in the sky. And so that in itself is, I was thinking, what happens if we can listen to those satellites to feel how our position on the planet is rather than being directed by a navigational route, if you like. Like I'm going from A to B. Instead of that, thinking, no, well, actually, I'm here in relation to
Nice.
something. Yeah, so that was the kind of emphasis that I was working with, and I felt that I could do that through sound in a way that the visual takes that away, takes that sense of relationality in some way. So yeah, so those instruments that I designed, the satellite sounders, had no screen on them. I did not want to use anything with a screen that you could see a map or anything like that. And so it's a really non-functional navigation, if you like.
Very functional. I will disagree with you. I think premise is just fantastic, and there's something visionary to me about it, to have that cosmic placement. So how did you have the participants navigate through sound using Sunra?
Well, what I did was I made these headphones and these little instruments basically that were connected to headphones, and I would hand them to people. Whether this was in, a gallery setting, I did one in the Kunsthalle in Frankfurt, and then they organized a time when we would meet and we would have this kind of gathering that people would sign up, and there were other events that I did, or I would do it very spontaneously with people or with students or all different places. So they would be handed this instrument, the satellite sounder, and then they would go out. They would walk wherever they wanted to walk, or sit if they would rather sit. You didn't have to go anywhere in particular.
So beautiful.
So the idea was also that the sound was happening and then it would dip to a very quiet level when there was not much happening in the change of the satellite positions. So I'm sonifying the position of the satellites, much less emphasis on my position as such. Yeah, so this moving sphere around us, if you like. And so when it would dip to a quietness, that's when people would always report back that they paid attention to where they were all of a sudden. So there was this kind of oscillation between the sounds of the satellites and the silent spots, if you like, that would bring sort of this oscillation of attention between thinking about the satellite sound and our position in relation to satellites, and then being back on the ground, if you like, wherever it was, in the city or outside, wherever people were. So there was this that oscillation became really important to me.
So
Does that make sense?
it makes so much sense. And it's really be here now. It's very much also
Yeah.
connected to meditation practice.
Hmm.
And I'm immediately wondering if you were influenced or informed by a meditation practice that led you to create a way for people to experience that without particularly going into what they would imagine as meditation, but as a sound artwork.
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned that because I was not specifically influenced by meditation practice. I wasn't referencing anything like that, but I was beginning to study yoga with, for the first time in my life. I was living in Amsterdam in the old center by the canals, on the old canals, working on this project, and I was beginning yoga studies with a really wonderful teacher in Amsterdam. And that study, I do think, influenced me in many ways. And in fact, she would come to my performances and exhibitions and things. She was an artist and a dancer, and she was an older woman who had had a lot of experience with things, and she would come to my performances, and I was my 30s at the time, and she would be really excited and say, "This is yoga." Like, really? Is it? Okay. I didn't know. I didn't really have that reference. I have a lot more understanding of meditation practices and different forms of that now, but I didn't really at the time. But I do think there was definitely a connection with this idea of attention.
Well, that makes perfect sense to me also, because yoga is very much about body and mind coming together and the movements being meditation. And what you're talking about is you're having people move and listen. So I could see what she was saying, it's yoga. A lot of people lose track of that and just see it as a kind of a physical exercise.
Yeah, she was never teaching it like that.
Yes, so she
Yeah.
was a very good teacher.
Yes, she
Are
was.
you still in touch with her?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
That's
She was the
wonderful.
best teacher I've ever had, and she was my first teacher.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
the real thing, right? I
yeah.
mean,
It
when
was the
you're
real thing.
Wonderful.
And then
So,
when I think back, actually, Victoria, also at the same time, I was uh, a couple of years later, I started to get into, I was doing my PhD after this project, and I studied with Pauline Oliveros, the
oh,
composer. And so
amazing.
I did a deep listening retreat with her. And of course, that work is all about meditation and tying meditation and listening together. And it was the first time that I'd done Tai Chi and Qigong practices. And so, and dream work. And so these things definitely, but they came kind of after that project with the satellite sounders, which is
Interesting.
kind of interesting, I think.
Well, you attracted it, right? So you were waking up, but you were waking others up, and then you create this kind of field where it pulls you in the next direction.
Yeah,
I'm very curious to hear a little more about how you got to Pauline Oliver's retreat. Was this a longer one? Can tell us a
it
little
was
more about it.
it was one of the deep listening residential retreats, which took, it was a week. And she came across to Europe for one of these. And it was in Spain. So in a artist residency place that I had previously worked at, now Cochlea in Camallera in Catalonia. So I knew the place and I could physically get myself there. And I was an artist on a low budget.
Yeah,
I
but
wasn't able to fly around and go
right.
visit things. So
But how did you hear about it? How did you connect?
so I mean, I've been interested in her work for a longer time, and what's interesting to me, Victoria, is that there was something about the idea of speaking of meditation or even of bringing that into the work that was not considered somehow acceptable or something.
Yes, yes, this is very true and
Yeah,
important for people listening now, especially from the younger generations
yeah,
who are very accepting of it now.
yeah,
But I think a lot of us had to be kind of undercover that,
yep,
it was really looked down at because we were
yeah.
hitting a very materialistic paradigm and in academia and as well in a big way. From a different type of materialism, of course, but same also. Everything had to be quantified and proved, and postmodernism was all the rage, of course, too. So
Mhm.
anything spiritual was like, poof, that's
Yeah.
not, yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I think it's important to mention this. It's good to try to think through this with you now, actually, because I'm still thinking through it, I think. So Pauline Oliveros was a complete outlier. I mean, I had been studying since college. I've been studying and interested in American experimental composers. That's what they were called. People like Alvin Lucier, or Lou Harrison, people like this. And I managed to study with these people, and it was amazing. It was incredible. But
Incredible.
I was kind of moving away from that European tradition, if you like, anyway. So I was already positioned sort of, I mean, as a woman and as somebody interested in the environment in that time, I was struggling to find my place within the music world and within the electronic music world, and which is why I moved into installations and visual art and all these things that I was interested in. And Pauline gave me a sort of an inspiration or a model or something that I could think, oh, look, there's another way to do this. And I
Right.
remember people in some of my professors, the people in Europe, saying to me, but who is this Pauline Oliveris? I mean, I don't get it. I mean, why is she interesting? Why are people interested in that? And I and it was a genuine feeling of,
Yes.
I just don't get it. What is interesting in that thing? So there was that, I mean, I was doing something so different. It felt so different that it was just wonderful to find this community of people that she was working with, this deep listening um, idea, and be able to see resonances in the work that I did. I never became somebody who, trained as in deep listening or taught the courses or anything like that. But I do really think that she was so influential at that time, and had a, had significant.
One of the things that I love as a quote from her is, I don't have time to build a career. I'm too busy building a community.
Hmm.
And I love that so much because it is so opposite to that kind of ego, one person artist persona that, the art world, traditional art world, let's call it, established, basically needs in order to market, etc.
Yeah.
And and to see also now not only is spirituality accepted and looking for the invisible and inaudible to inform us of what's going on, but additionally, there's so many artists now that are groups, that are community-based, that are reaching out. And with the times we're hitting now, it's almost a necessity
Hmm.
to have a sense of community. So this is exactly what you were feeling, and there wasn't much support for that at all at that time.
No.
It was really not, it's like you say, it wasn't even registering. It wasn't necessarily like people were against it. It just wasn't registering.
Yes,
But
exactly.
backtrack just for 1 second. So where were you studying? You're mentioning that you were studying and you were finding this out, but what was it that you were studying and where?
So at this stage, I was doing my PhD in the Netherlands. It was this group, Leiden University
Of
and
course,
the
yes.
Orpheus Institute in Ghent and the Royal Conservatory in The Hague, and they had this new PhD in artistic research that they were developing, which was really,
Very new,
it was
yes.
very new. I was one of the very first students in it. I was one of the first women to graduate from it. And so I was the second or third to actually graduate, and I was the first woman. So it
Fantastic,
was, yeah,
pioneering.
they were, it was really exciting, that whole idea of bringing in musicians who are already, uh, already working in the field, who wanted to go further into some form. So they already had some kind of professional practice. They were from all over Europe. We could get advisors from all over Europe or the world, and I did so.
Yeah,
I had David Dunn as my
nice.
PhD supervisor, and Bob Gilmore, who was an
Wow.
amazing. Yeah, so I mean, I really managed. Waited years to get the right PhD, to find the place that would accept the work that I was doing, and then this happened, and it was exactly what I needed.
So
So
before that, where were you? What were you
before
studying?
that, where did I study? Oh, well, you have to
Yes.
go back a few years because
Yes, yes, yes,
yeah,
yes.
right at
Give
the,
us
you want to go back.
maybe do like a full loop back to where you started on this path. I'm always so interested in how this kind of winding path ends up where you are.
Yeah. Well, where do you want to start?
Where it makes sense, where you had, to me, it's always a little bit like a light bulb moment that shifts, and then all kinds of stuff happen, and there's another light bulb moment, and things
Mm,
shift. So it could have been very early in
yeah.
childhood, it could have been in high school, it really varies in all of us.
Yeah, well, I mean, I should say, I suppose, that I grew up in a family of architects and artists, and that was my milieu. That was where I had, it was all around me. It was in
Right,
everything we did,
right.
everything we
You,
talked about. It
you
was,
were
I mean,
immersed.
yeah, completely immersed. But I happened to be at the local village school in Devon, deep down in Devon in the southwest of England. I was kind of bored with the work. I found it easy, and a local music teacher came around, and she could teach the flute or the clarinet. So I chose the flute, and I was 7 years old, and I did the local music lessons, and I just accelerated with the flute and the local piano teacher in the village. And within 2 or 3 years, I won a music scholarship to a really good English school. I
Right.
had to go away to it. It was like this
Wow.
whole thing. But there was no precedent really in my family of what to do with somebody who was musical. So I didn't have music all
Interesting.
around me in the family. I had the arts and architecture and design and all of
And
that
space. And
space.
space.
Yeah.
With
So
the
it was all,
architecture.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly, all about space and how you experience space and how it
That's
fits
right.
within the city or within the society or in these things. So it was very tied into all those questions. So of course, when I grew up, I had that, and I was also a musician, and so I was these both of these things, and there was never a place for to study both of those things all the way through school. They were scheduled at the same time, so I could go all the way into university. Oh no, you can't. It's just then it's like, why is this so strange? This seems to me like there's a continuum between
Yes.
these
Yeah.
things. That to me, there's no separation. And the other significant thing about my upbringing was that my parents as architects, um, they moved to a kind of their careers just went up and down financially, depending on the financial markets and everything else. There was no kind of stability in an architectural career. So we had these huge swings, which I remember as a child.
Mm.
And one of the times we ended up having to sell the house we were in and moving, they found this house, which was a ruin on the edge of the cliffland in the southwest of England. And you had to drive down a mile or so down this rough track all the way along the cliffs. It was filmed in a Pride and Prejudice. No, it was the Sense and Sensibility, a Jane
Ah,
Austen movie later. I remember them coming along the cliffs with the whole film set. It's kind of this kind of image of the English coastline, and we all moved, this family of four children, three brothers I had, and we all moved to this kind of ruined house, which they then did up, but it was a listed historic building, so it remained the same on the outside, and it was.
uh-huh.
But that's where we grew up.
Beautiful.
So we had these wild clifflands that we would just roam in. Uh,
Wow.
and that influenced me so much in terms of my connection to the ocean, to the place. We were always in boats, little boats, and sailing.
It explains
And
so much about your current work, especially, but we'll come to that later. I
yeah,
mean, it
so I
makes
mean these
perfect
things.
sense.
Right. So these were this kind of high-powered school, and then this wildness, and the music and the art not fitting together, and these things. And so I think my career was really about has always been about trying to fit those things together and keep it as a whole, where the institutions around me keep trying to pull it apart and make me one thing or another, and I'm not. Yeah. And I think this is becoming more accepted now with interdisciplinary work and
Thankfully, although a lot of it is
gradually.
still just in
Yeah.
words and not action, but it's
Yes.
definitely so much better. At least there's a willpower for interdisciplinarity, but when you start actually engaging in academia, I'm sure you have the same experience at UC Santa Cruz. The system is so crystallized in these departments that to work around it, above it, underneath it, takes a lot of effort, and
Absolutely.
it's not exactly that it's seen as something to be celebrated. Let's put it that way.
No, not at all. I mean, my last 8 years of my work in UC Santa Cruz, in order to work in these different departments across these fields, I was a lecturer. There was no place to be hired as anything but a lecturer and take courses in each department to try to create this space that's interdisciplinary. Now I have a place that is interdisciplinary. We've kind of
Finally,
named
yeah,
one. Yeah,
yeah.
but these institutions didn't kind of have it there built in. And so, this was the trouble. I went to Edinburgh University to study music, and I wanted to do art, and it was it was the very same thing. And after 2 years there, and this was a light bulb moment. I wanted to do composition, music composition. I wanted to be a composer. I decided this is what I wanted to be. And so I applied to do a composition course, and they said, well, send in a portfolio. Well, bear in mind, I had never had a composition lesson because nobody had taught me any of this. And it was judged by by a panel of men, of course. And I was told that what I handed in didn't show enough imagination. This was the phrase that they used. And so I remember taking it to my mother, and she said, she laughed.
What else can you say
You.
of all
And
people?
I mean, how wrong can they get? But it's so interesting to me. There's this 19-year-old who is so passionate about doing something so odd and wants to, and spent the summer trying to write compositions that she'd never been taught how to do, and is rejected because it's not imaginative enough. And it's just that sort of thing happened to me repeatedly, I see in my career. But fortunately, I had someone like my mother who would be able to say, well, that's just, you shouldn't. She then went on to say, well, you don't need to stay there. Let's find something
Right.
else for you. So that was then when we looked for something else, and I found Dartington College of Art, which has now closed down, but it was
Oh,
this really radical and amazing place in Devon, in right near where I grew up. So I was living on the cliffs, driving
and you
this,
came back full circle.
yeah, came back full circle, driving to this medieval art college where I learned about American experimental composers, including Pauline Oliveros.
Incredible. So when did that
Yeah,
close down?
it shifted, it moved down and merged with another university. And I don't remember, 10, 15 years ago now, but it,
Yeah, I remember when there was a big movement because I was studying with Roy Ascott, so I was in the UK a lot, and
yeah,
there was a big movement of these merging and changing of the
yeah,
status, right? Something like that.
yes. Yeah,
Too
but
bad.
and
Too
Dartington
bad.
was this very radical institute.
Yes,
They
yes.
the courses that they taught were music from the 1950s onwards. Bearing in mind this was in the 1990s, so it's really contemporary music. They taught performance writing, visual performance, and theater. So
Amazing.
they were
Amazing.
very,
What a
very radical.
gift.
Yeah.
What a gift.
And the students there were so diverse. They came from all different backgrounds, different ages, different abilities. I mean, it was, and I was the one who had this much more traditional English,
Oh wow,
university
amazing, huh?
education. Yeah,
Suddenly you're the more
yeah,
traditional.
yes, exactly. So it was just so enlivening to be there. And they're the students that were there are the ones that I meet all over the world doing this. They're making music. They're professionals in their fields. They're so engaged. We had public projects that we had to do where we had to engage with the community. This was,
Beautiful.
these,
So ahead of its
yeah,
time.
yeah,
So ahead of its time. And I'm imagining you're bringing this into your teaching now at UC
absolutely.
Santa Cruz. They're very lucky to have you. It's great.
Yeah.
All right, so that gives me such a better picture, and you can see why I asked these questions because it's so connected. And you can see how, if you started with telling us about the PhD, it would be great, impressive, but what got you there to me is the
Yeah,
really interesting kind of meat of the story because it explains so much about these projects you did. And even my first impression of you, now I can get why that was my first impression. I was like, wow, sound and space and time, and then, of course, the cosmology. Are you aware, speaking of sun run sun, that we're in the solar maximum right now as we speak? That the sun is at this maximum stage of its flares and magnetism?
I did not know that.
So a lot of people don't, which really surprises me. Every 11 years or so, it's not exact, the sun has these maximum moments.
Mm.
And the solar maximum means huge solar flares and magnetism, of course, that affects everything. And our planet, of course, as well. And if you think about what the timing is, it started mid 2024 and it's going to go throughout 2025. It potentially can knock down satellite systems, infrastructures, electrical grids. So there's a lot of kind of race to space that's related as well to making sure that we can predict in time to move these surveillance or internet or satellite devices, whatever. But what my question is, and it actually relates very much to this conversation and to you talking about being in the place and thinking cosmically about where we are, is that first of all, it affects the whole planet. When there's talk about it, it's mostly about the technology and infrastructure that's in danger. I started asking, well, how does it affect us? And there's some speculation that goes back to the 20s with a Russian researcher that it actually very much affects the human body. Duh. I mean, the sun is 10,000 times bigger than us. In the sense that it magnifies everything. So whatever it is that you are in the space and time, it magnifies. Which also means if you're angry, you're angrier. If you're crazy, you're crazier. If you're nice, et cetera, et cetera. And if you pay attention to what's going on the planet now, it perfectly makes sense. But somehow it's not in the news. I mean, there's like NASA weather reports, et cetera. Again, back to your piece, the piece Sun Run Sun, I think it's so important now to bring that piece back and to point to our relation to the sun. I would love it if you did that as a workshop or as a way to relive that idea of where are you now in relation to this larger cosmology. This message is so critical right now when there's so much division and nationalism and going into these boxes to expand out. Wait, we're part of this larger cosmic system. And we're disturbing it too, and it's being disturbed, and it's disturbing us. So all of these kind of mixes, I just think that what you did with that piece was visionary. It was a really intuitive way to tap into so many meditative practices that expand out into cosmologies. And that's what artists do, basically. I mean, sometimes it's a direct influence, sometimes not, but for sure, like there's what John Cage would call an antenna that we have, and we're just kind of following these frequencies to point us, and then we point others, right, to this direction. Whether we make a change or not is a different question that I may ask you with climate change. With so many of us thinking we can kind of raise awareness, I don't see any difference. I think it's just getting worse. So anyway, a long way to bring it back to Sun Run Sun and maybe move you towards the current work and how your path was taking you to the next kind of exploration, right, of space and time and your body and your experiences and becoming a mother and teacher and all this other complexity coming into the picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that piece, Sun Run Sun, was really a foundation for what I do now. And I tend to, when I present my work, I tend to start around there, maybe the project just before taking soundings, where I started to work with the GPS and was looking at sonic navigations of other species, for example. Underwater sounds started to come in. So just to take us back to those early years that I described, when I was working, I was always interested in the environment because that was what I lived in. I was so connected to it. I was a complete daydreamer, and those qualities were actively pushed away. Anyone who was interested in what was called landscape art, yes, of some kind, or even land art. I mean, land art was a big thing in England, but it was so
Imposing. right?
Yeah, there was, yes, and my interest in it was so irrelevant. It was an irrelevant topic, basically. It was like, oh, you're just interested in pretty flowers. That's all people can think of. These kind of comments, and it was just so hard to find my place in these things, in the worlds that I was in competition. And I moved. In the end, I moved from England, especially because I couldn't find my place in England. So at 22, I finished my degree, and I left, and I went to Europe, and Europe was just beginning to open up its borders, and the Berlin Wall had come down a few years before. And so, there was really exciting things happening in Europe. And that was when I went to the Netherlands, and they were like, well, of course, yeah, you're a composer. You can say you're a composer. And I was like, am I? Really? People want to think I'm being like some, what? It was just so interesting. So Europe gave me this huge freedom to explore the environment and these ideas and these connections. Later I went to the University of Cambridge, and I did this degree, which again was the very first year of this new master's program in architecture, in the architecture department. It was called Architecture and the Moving Image. So it tied together all these things, architecture, video, the visual arts, and sound and music all together.
Beautiful.
I
Wow.
had that little gem for a while, and then moved back to Europe. I moved to Barcelona. I lived there for 3 years, worked with architects and performers and things, and then moved back up to the Netherlands and worked there. And it was only by the time that I got to this Sun Run Sun piece that I was really starting to understand. And I think people were getting much more interested in the environment, and the changes happening. And then I could do this work. It was almost like I couldn't do it until then. It was just considered just not, there was there was no resonance with it. I think that's what it is. Do you know what I mean?
And yes, I do.
Be a
And
resonance.
the word resonance is exactly it, because there's a certain paradigm that needs to happen where the resonance changes and the interests change.
Mhm.
Absolutely, I get it. But
Yeah,
it's important to hear how these paths, how long they take sometimes,
yeah,
and to not lose sight of yourself and your own resonance that eventually gets in tune with others. And
yeah,
when you're resonating with something that's yet to come, you have to really trust that. And a lot of
yeah.
people lose faith or just lose their way because there's so little support. Even like in a sense of supporting you in this search where you're not even sure where you're going.
Yeah,
That's the materialistic kind of path that's set out for people is so cruel, actually, that if it
it
doesn't
is.
work, you just don't fit. And then somehow the art world does provide the space for that. And I think that's why there's a lot of people who end up there. Science a little bit. And this is where it's actually quite beautiful as well that these two worlds are refinding themselves. That they were separated for way too long for no reason that makes sense, actually quite destructive. So it's wonderful to see the persistence of vision, and I think your parents had quite a lot to do with that. They instilled in you, no, that's silly, just
Yeah,
keep doing your thing. That's
yeah.
very rare.
They
That's
were
very
very
rare.
rare.
That's
Yeah.
very rare. Yeah.
We were an odd family.
You're
I can see
very
that very
lucky.
clearly. We are a very unusual situation, I think.
Well, the
But
English do have eccentrics,
they
so.
do, don't they? And I don't think it's not a conscious choice to be an eccentric. I think it's just, I may be a little more part of being in that culture. I don't know. It was not like a, it's just kind of who we are.
So, when did you move to the US? Actually,
I
not
moved,
that.
no, I moved a little after the Sun Run Sun piece, a few years after that.
I see.
And to go, I mean, to go to the idea of orientations that you were talking about, this orienting to the, I don't want to forget that question, orienting to the, our place on the planet, if you like. I think
Yes.
that has built from the Sun Run Sun project, and I'm still all these projects still do that. So, that a lot of the work I've been doing has been about underwater sound, and the animals that live in it, particularly focusing on whales, and for various reasons. Um, but also listening to those sounds in other places, like in the desert, for example, or in a inland cities, or different places. So displacing sound in different ways, and to help us listen to where we are on a broader scale. So sort of locating us, feet on the ground. This is where I am, but expanding that out into distant places, environments that we cannot access, that we cannot reach. How do we understand that distance? How do we bring that into ourselves? Yes. It gets more and more complex the more I think about it. So I think of, I was using the term sonic navigation during that Sun Run Sun, and, GPS was all about navigation specifically. And now I tend to think of it more as orientation.
Uh-huh.
So what's the difference between navigation and orientation? And I think navigation is more goal-based. Yes, you're moving somewhere. Orientation tends to be the way that you're turning, or the way that you orient towards something. Um, and how can we cultivate that in different ways? And so that's, yeah, how does sound and listening help us do that?
So, how did you get started in underwater sound? What was that moment?
I,
She
I try to
laughs. She
I try to
laughs.
I try to think where if there was a moment. I mean, I I so again, my family, I grew up in little boats on the ocean.
There
That's
you
how I
go.
grew up. So we were, pushed off in little boats to sail, and so this is what we could all do, and I still can. I can get in a boat and sail it off. So, and at some point, my it was my parents, my mother's little inheritance from her father. She decided she was going to spend it on buying a boat, a bigger one. And so it was a yacht she bought. And in the end, she found it in Florida, of all places. They got a cheap winter package deal flight from the dark English weather. This was before cheap flights,
Right,
were
right,
happening.
right.
And they went to Florida, and she'd never been there, this English woman in Florida. And they finally found this boat. And it was some yacht that had been used to go between, it was dubious what this history of this
I
boat.
see, I see, I see.
And so anyway, they bought this boat, and it was a what, 50-foot yacht. It was quite old, but not in great condition, but it was what it was. So
Yeah.
that was Grandpa's inheritance, went on this yacht. And then
Amazing.
then we went, my two older brothers, she's my two older brothers and me, out to Florida. We were in our early 20s to sail it back.
Oh my God, what?
So this is what we did. I mean, that's a whole other story, but
Incredible
boat then became
story.
this boat then became the way that we could all, as a family, they all ended up leaving England shortly after me. And it
Uh-huh.
was the boat that was the transit, if you like, the way of moving out. So we literally kind of sail. I think of it as sailing off
Stay
from that
alive.
cliff land. We just went. And this boat, once we got it back to Devon, then we sailed it down. We would do it in different legs. People would take different parts of it, but we would sail it all the way down to the Mediterranean, around the Bay of Biscay, around through the Gibraltar Straits, and then into the Mediterranean. And then over several years, we would winter it in different places. We wintered down all the way as far as Turkey, and then back in
Wow.
different places. And eventually, they found the place that they wanted um, to move to when they relocated.
So the whole
So
family would do these trips together.
yes, yeah. And so, I mean, when it was wintering, I spent a whole year after my Dartington, once I'd graduated, I spent a whole year in living in a marina in Spain, uh, all winter long and trying to teach English. And I made covers for boats. So I could sew, so I'd sew covers for boats and I would compose music and I would do these things. So this, one of my brothers did his whole PhD in Barcelona by living on this boat in the marina. And so it was like this sort of mobile family sort of studio thing. I can't think of it as another way of
I
saying it.
love it. And so where did everybody end up? Just quickly, I'm
They all ended
curious.
up in Spain.
All of them in Spain.
Yeah, all of
Where
them.
where in Spain?
In Barcelona, Catalonia, and Mallorca, the Balearic Islands.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and they're all, my older two brothers are all involved with boats and sailing and design and all these things. Yeah, so it was, but I think of this boat, to go back to your question, where did
Yeah,
the ocean underwater sound come from? I think of this boat and I think of the amount of hours that I spent on that and the different kinds
of
of
course.
experiences that I had, and being out at sea without for days, and these
Of
different
course.
experiences that obviously inform me so much that of course I was interested when dolphins would come up alongside us covered in phosphorescence in the night. It's like, oh, what is this? So I think there was always a connection to the ocean. And so
Oh,
the
it makes
idea of,
perfect sense.
yeah,
It's not even going back to the question, it just perfectly makes sense between the cliffs and the boat and the family being in this kind of quest, right?
yes.
When was the first time you threw in a hydrophone and kind of started recording
Yeah.
what's
Well,
going
when I
on?
managed, yeah, 2007, I managed to buy myself a hydrophone. And it was one of the first hydrophones you could get that was affordable. Remember, it had to be affordable.
I remember, I think that's exactly when I got my first ones.
Right, right.
Yes, yes,
And that was it. And I got a little tiny recording
that's
device
it.
I could plug it into. And I took it to the boat and I made these pieces and these recordings and I could hear what was happening. And it was shocking. I mean, this piece, Pink Noise, it's called. Pink Noise that I made was a video installation. And
I remember that,
video,
yes.
yeah, in the Natural Marine Preserve there is,
Yeah.
in the Balearic Islands is, it's turquoise blue with pink reflections of the light and it's crystal clear and it's just nobody can do anything there. Okay, apart from boats can come in, yachts can come in, and they come, these huge power yachts come across from Italy, and they drop their big anchors and so, but no one can do anything, no pollution of any kind. But you put the hydrophone in and there's the pollution. It's this incredibly loud noise. And so that's the
Incredible.
recordings that I made. Yeah. And that piece that I created was that juxtaposition of those recordings. And you
Yes.
stand on this projection of this beautiful pool of Mediterranean water and you hear these incredible industrial noises, basically.
Mhm.
So that's really what led me into thinking, okay, so what happens? What is this? Where do I go from here?
It's so shocking. It's
Yeah.
really, I think, something that to this day people don't get how bad it is in our waters, under the seas and oceans and lakes even. It's
Yeah.
just mind-boggling how these poor creatures even survive it.
Yeah, so that led me to the research of what is happening with underwater sound and to find out that it travels 5 times faster and it travels
Mm,
much further and life depends on sound so much more in dark places
mm.
with low visibility and so it led me to the science, to the scientists who are working with this, to it more deeply into whale sound and what is actually happening there and what the science was. And and that's where I started really to relate the underwater sound to the terrestrial, which is where I as a human being spend my time after all. Yeah. And how do we how do we navigate that? How do we orient within that?
Orient. That's
the word,
it. That's
orient.
the word,
Yes.
yes. So that brings us to the piece that you did with Ari.
Yes.
And this is when you were already at UC Santa Cruz, right? You were
Yes.
already teaching, and
Yes.
how did that come about?
Yeah, so I'd been doing you know, it was one of these things. I had a commission in Dundee, Scotland to work on a piece about their whaling history. And I had used sounds from Kate Stafford, a professor at the University of Washington, who had recorded sounds under the Arctic ice because I wanted to know where the whaling fleet from Dundee had actually done the whaling. And I wanted recordings of the voices of these animals from the Arctic. And she had them, these beautiful recordings. So I used that to create a piece. And then in Dundee Harbor. And then I wanted, you know, I'm on the bay, on the Monterey Bay here in Santa Cruz, which is one of the main migrating routes and it's filled with wildlife and it's filled with whales, migrating whales of different kinds. And so I wanted to do something here. I was like, well, it's all very well to do it all the way over in Dundee, Scotland. Can I find a way here? So that was where I started working with the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute and their deep ocean hydrophone and the sounds from that, and made sound walks that we had done together with the class during the pandemic.
Yes, oh, that was so
Yeah,
fantastic during the pandemic. I
yeah,
really think of it as something, as a very special gift to whoever was participating, to be able to, again, in this case, again, it's like Sandra and Son, where we're locked up in our rooms and you're taking us on a walk. That's actually shifting our ways of thinking of sound locally, remotely. And you also gave us SoundCloud to play at the
yeah,
same time. So we were listening to the sounds that were happening in real time and
yeah,
the sound, we were all sharing, because we turned it on at the same time, the sound that was pre-recorded and watching, right?
yes,
So it's just wonderful. I hope you keep doing those. It
yeah.
was really, really a memorable experience.
Good, good. Yeah, so that's the connection that I'm trying to work out with all these pieces. And so one of the things that then led me to was, so this is a fixed hydrophone out in the bay there that you know we're looking at during that walk, and what happens again if we can find a moving hydrophone? Excuse me. And I'd previously worked with Kate Stafford on a moving hydrophone, but on a sea glider remote vehicle. But I thought, well, let's look into animal tags, the tagging of whales, and it was beginning to happen and beginning to become more prominent. And I understood something about tagging of birds and other kinds of animals, and so it turned out that one of the main researchers happened to be in UC Santa Cruz, so Ari Friedlander. So, and the other wonderful thing is that when I contacted him, he was open to it. He was, yes, I understand this. You know, I understand the interest of an artist, and let's talk about it. So it was through that generosity of him and his interest in the arts and his supporting that I was able to get recordings, understand what he was doing, and then get different parts of the recordings from the whale tags and work through those ideas with him. And then, you know, work through the actual material myself over time. Again, this was during the pandemic, and I created an installation of that work. And it's glitchy, it's full of noise when the microphone comes out, when the whale comes out and it
Yeah,
splashes back in. There are distortions in the video, and and I chose to intentionally keep those qualities to this
yeah,
material because I'm trying to emphasize that this we are not the whale seeing. This is not, don't imagine that this is how the whale experiences the
right.
world. This is us hopping on the back of a whale without asking, by the way, and and you know, exploring like that. Yeah, it's a technological extension of ourselves, and what that does to the animal, etc. So to be, these images are just astounding if you've not seen them before. Just the speed and the force and the breaking through from underwater up into air to breathe and then back down. It's really astounding seeing other animals around. So it's a shift in perspective. And so that was 2020. That's already that I did that started contacted him in 2019. So that's 5 years ago. Now, there's this Netflix, Our Oceans, narrated by Barack Obama. And there it begins with, I just watched it the other day. Someone told me, I was like, okay, what is this? It begins with the whale and the humpback whales and the chase and all the drama that is narrated in a nature documentary, basically the same kind of format. And there are it cuts from drone footage to underwater footage of somebody with a camera underwater to these tags, footage from these tags. So there it is. It's mixed in. It's like your very own GoPro. It's just another viewpoint that is used.
That's
And it's
right.
crystal clear. It's perfect, high quality video. It's like, and I'm like, look at that. That's not like what I've got at all. But it's interesting because I just love to see that trajectory of how the technology is developing and changing and how it gets absorbed into how we consume media and how we
Yes.
relate, and how differently how do I position myself in relation to that and how I use this material. It's really
It's
interesting.
so important because this, I mean, it's very possible that somebody even caught your installation and then thought, wait, we could do this quote unquote better. Do you know
Yeah,
what I
right. Yeah.
mean?
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and it's actually much worse.
It's just different. It
Well,
started a
yes,
different
no,
function.
it's absolutely different. It has a different function. However, the reason I'm very consciously saying it's much worse
Yeah.
is because it gives the wrong idea of why we are looking and participating and putting these cameras and tags and drones on these animals. It's
Yes.
once again this kind of predatory viewpoint of
Yeah.
them in service of us, and that's
Absolutely.
ridiculous. So your point of view is actually critical and important so that somebody sees that and then they can compare. I
Yeah.
mean, you did it yourself. You were able to read through that film, right? You
Yeah.
were able to read it. Oh, that's what they did here. That's what they did. Most people don't. They have no
Right.
idea. They don't even think, is it an underwater camera? What is it? It's mostly the experience. And they get carried away in this experience that's actually false. It's not even close to what it's about. So,
Yeah, which brings me, Victoria, to the questions that I'm asking now. And you can see the thread with technologies that emerge like GPS or these whale tags. What does that do to us? And now, of course, um, AI, the questions that are arising with groups that are actively working on using machine learning to translate sounds from whales so that we can communicate. These are the words
yes,
that they use, translation and
yes,
communication. And so, and looking into the ways they frame these ideas, how they're speaking about it, so the technological ability may possibly be there, but hang on, what is this?
that's
Wait a
it.
second. So trying to encourage people who are in these fields and in this, to think much and speak out. Let's try to find ways um, to frame and to support this technological development so that it doesn't just blunder in and say, "Oh, let's talk to whales. Let's see what we can say." Yeah, because the same thing's going to happen. It'll be absorbed in, and we need so much more critical reflection on what that means. Um, so. Yeah, what does that mean? How do I even have? what kind of ethical responsibility do I have if I take sound from an environment that I'm not from? Can I do that? Is
Mm.
that not some kind of when does it become a kind of
Yeah.
soft colonialism of taking something and then showing it somewhere else? And I've been talking about this since my PhD all those years ago, this idea of sonic colonialism, whereas there is some responsibility to the material that we take and use and how we're presenting it. That is really important. And I think the idea of these whale tags or translating sound, translating voices of other animals. What other ways are there to think about our relation to them before we do such a thing? I mean, why would we do such a thing? Well, because we
Right.
can, yes?
Right.
And because technology is a constant forward progress, and that's what we're after. But I mean, and I think colonial studies, decolonial studies, these ideas of really grappling with this idea. Indigenous studies are grappling with these ideas of how do we have responsibility to where we are and to the people or animals that are there. Yeah. So um, these ideas they just seem um, so resonant is that word resonant again. And one of the things that I did then consciously for this project in with you, the sound portal, the sound portal for whale bubbles, is to move away from the sounds. Okay, so what happens if I move away from these famous humpback whale sounds that we can hear and then say, oh, that's a humpback whale. I wonder what they're saying. Yeah. Can we move away from that and think of other ways? And so I was looking into their form of bubble making. Well, if these are breathing animals, they are most likely expert in forming bubbles. Yes, I mean in breathing, which would make bubbles. What does this do? As a musician, as a flute player, I know about control of breath, very fine control of breath. They must be experts in these things. What is a bubble underwater? What is it? Would it be a form of communication? It would be a form of touch. Yes, you can feel bubbles. Anyone who's been in a river or in a jacuzzi
Yes.
or hot tub, you feel bubbles. There's a sense that there is something material in this. So that would, it's not a great stretch of the imagination that would also be some kind of communication. So instead of just narrowing it to sound, to try to think more broadly and try to bring that out. That's why I was interested in the whale bubbles and then started to go into glass blowing, the breath of the air that goes into blowing glass, the sort of alchemical transformation of
The
the heat,
fire.
the
Yes.
fire of this molten material through breath that then solidifies into this clear sort of liquid. It looks liquid almost, but it's heavy, it has weight. How does that relate to the coldness of the ocean and the breath of the whales? So, what happens if we are given a whale bubble and we can hold it in our hand, a glass whale bubble, and say, here's a bubble. It's a whale bubble. These things. How does that work?
So I find it interesting as you're talking to realize that in a way it's a reaction to AI
Mm,
and deciphering and the idea of capturing language of another species to do something that's very palpable and alchemical, but actually old technology
mm.
that has nothing to do with AI in a sense. Is that correct to
Yeah,
understand it that way?
yeah. I think so. I mean, I think it was much more intuitive idea, and that when I started to work with glass, I don't think I don't think it was a specific reaction.
Right, right, of course. I mean, these things,
But as I see it like that. Yeah, I do see it like that. The more I think about it, let's put it that way. Well, the
yeah,
more work with these glass objects that I've made, and work with the material of the sound and the videos, uh, and think through these things. It's like, what is this alchemical sound portal space that I'm making? How does it relate to these questions that are coming up about our relation to these animals and this underwater world? Our ways that the ways that we need to understand them. How can we understand them without repeating the same colonial sort of or technological advance, this which is just so aggressive after all.
Yes, yes.
Um,
And it
and
comes in with a point of view. It doesn't open a space for dialogue or for a conversation. It doesn't orient you to thinking of a new way of being, which brings me to question to how how does an audience member make that connection? It's a bit of a leap to
mhm.
walk in and see these beautiful glass bubbles. What else are you bringing into it to make it an experiential space and moment where the person would start thinking, wait a minute, these are actually bubbles of whale breath?
Yeah, so there are the videos that are focused in this piece on the diving from the whale tags of the diving humpback whale that's creating creating bubble nets. Um, so you see videos of it diving deep and actually creating these bubbles. And I've worked on various different ways of installing it, and what we have now is a pretty straightforward video projections with the glass. But so you're going to have to make that jump in some way. But yeah, these are the whale bubbles that we have there. And then the other thing is the sound. One of the things I've been working with over the last months is, how does the sound and the video work together? I mean, there's this whole section in the video of the glass blowing process and the very bright colors of the heat of the glass and its liquid kind of forms and all its reflections. So the process is in there, and it's the sounds. I was like, okay, so what do I do if I don't use underwater sound? What do I use? Yeah, it's like, I don't know. So I've been going through all these different kinds of sounds, really reflecting on what does this mean, and thinking about sound in terms of a bubble. What is a bubble of sound? Not necessarily the sound of bubbles that we might think of, oh, blah, 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 that's the sound of a bubble. But thinking of, how could sound have a bubble-like quality? What even is a bubble? So kind of in a material way. And what I ended up with was recording all sorts of sounds from the glassmaking process, including collecting from the studio random sized glass bowls and plates that are used as demonstrations for the students. They're all different odd sizes. So when you hit them or sound them, um, uh, like a wine glass sounding technique or different kinds of things, they sound a little gong-like, a little bell-like, something like that. But they're all odd tunings and odd resonances, because they're not anything but a sort of a random selection for some other purpose. Yeah. So they're these sort of, I feel like I'm not choosing the sounds specifically in terms of compositional pitches or anything like that. I'm finding these objects that resonate. The other thing were harmonic series that play over a harp strings. I play the harp, so the harp is always part of this for me. What happens with the harmonic series above that resonates up above the main fundamental? The same with the flute. There are these whistle tones in the flute, which are these tiny sounds which just flutter over these harmonic series very high up. And you hear these, they're all very quiet, kind of intimate sounds. There are sounds of me actually trying to make things. There are odd splashing noises and clonks and, you know, things that show there's like give you a sense not of a perfect sound piece that you're walking into, but that a sense of someone trying to do something that's very intimate, that's like this crafting, this space of contemplation of like, what I'm trying to figure this out. Does this make sense? It's just
It actually makes total sense in in a way where, because you're moving away from the kind of National Geographic way of
yeah.
recording and following a whale, and you've had your own, another piece where you did that in your own way, you're rebelling against it. And then you're bringing us into the process of
Hmm.
thinking it through elements, through fire and glass and alchemy, and just
Hmm.
working it out. So we're all working it out in a way. Like, how do we think about this differently? But we don't quite know yet.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful idea, actually, to show the, or we hear the sounds of creation of these bubble pieces that are really about thinking through about the air. So
Hmm.
you're talking about air of this whale and the water and the sun, you know, with the solar flares that are happening right now, and the earth that we're coming from with our ways of thinking, all coming together through these sounds of making. It makes
Yeah.
sense. To me, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. It's almost like it's really nice to hear how it's always I love to have these conversations because then we sort of reflect back on each other and it's yeah, it's almost like how can I'm not sure how to put it really. It's like I want to present it as a question. Let's put it that way. The installation is a question. It's like inviting you in to think about these things. I'm not saying I
Here's the
know about
answer.
this.
Yes.
Here is the answer. Come and be fed the answer. I will tell you all. It's really about, I don't know. Do you want to think this through with me? It's more like that. And thinking, wow, look at what, one of the things I'm doing is I have these two videos that are not synchronized so that as they move through, they unsync even more and more and more. So you get different combinations of the videos coming on the two projections. And the sound file is also separate. It loops at different speeds as well. So you're always going to have a different combination of these things. Almost because when I was making it, I was like, I don't want to fix these. They don't want to fix. They do not want to sync. There's something about the fluidity of them moving in and out in relation to each other that I like. Can I keep that, please? It's a question. There's a lot of self-reflection of how do I even make these decisions? Being an artist is constantly making decisions. You have to decide so many things all the time. Um, but so where do those decisions come from? And they come so much from my training, from when I think
Right.
about it, why am I uncomfortable with a simple harp, a little snippet of a harp melody that I improvised? Why am I uncomfortable putting that in there? And it's because all sorts of things come up. It's because for some reason that in my past was something that's totally unacceptable.
Right. Right.
I'm thinking, well, why is that valid that it's unacceptable? Am I treating that? We're not thinking of it in terms of a significant musical thing. It's more like one of these little fragments of the making process. It's like it's just like one way of thinking through things that appears at some point and then goes. It doesn't have the weight of other material. So yeah, that sort of self-reflection and self-judgment that comes in of how am I making these decisions is really interesting as well, I think. I'm trying to break
And
out
it's
of.
also a very human response to the whale. Well, this is my world, so I'm thinking through with what I have in front of me. And
Mhm.
these are all different experiences that are informing how I go about it. And I see it rebellious in many ways. It's really rebelling against what we have been taught, told, what AI is supposed to do and not do, and how we're looking at things and approaching technology. And we're not Luddites, but we are rebelling against it because it's imposed on us now. So just as we impose it on the animals, we impose it on ourselves through
Mhm.
all these trainings. So you're kind of rebelling against these presuppositions of what is sound art, what is environmental art, what is sculpture, what is, all these boxes of
Yeah.
where do you put in the harp, where do you not? And you just say, no, I'm just going to be here now and let it all come together, and I'm kind of in service of it, and then I'll think about it.
Yeah, because one of the things that I very, very strongly feel and work with is that the making is the research, the making, the ways that we make, the actual engagement in, does this go with this? What happens if I do this to this material? It lets the material and the process speak in a way that helps you find new things, new ideas, helps you relate to these things. I mean, I didn't consciously think of something alchemical when I was thinking of this, but it sort of emerged out of it.
Sure,
I don't think of even, there are connotations to that word that I don't really associate with, and yet that it seems to be the right word. I wouldn't have found that had I not done this work.
that's right.
So to learn a new technique, to learn how to blow glass, I had no idea about glass. I didn't know anything really about it. And so to go into the studio with undergraduates as one of them trying to learn how to blow glass and working with the expert glass blower on specifically together as a duo to make these pieces. They were experiences that I'll never forget as a way of learning, as a way of understanding the material. Um, you know, I, that's part of it. That how can we think more expansively?
The sounds of making. So, how do you plan to have the audiences engaged in a performative way, and where do you see this pointing you next? How is this experience reorienting your next kind of vista? Like, oh, let's explore this now.
So, in the last few years, so alongside this atmosphere of sound research project, I was doing a project in Amsterdam that was a 2-year project called Iconic Landscape. So these two have been kind of running alongside each other, and I'm working on this new idea called a sound portal. This piece is named after the piece in Amsterdam was called Vertigo in the sound portal. So a sound portal is something that I think is a seed that will continue for me. And again, it's a question. What is this? What is a sound portal? And it's a place where I can simultaneously, it's like a simultaneity of place and time and sound in one place. So if you think of a portal, like a teleportal that we could, I wish I could be somewhere the other side of the world. I'll just go there. I'll go in my portal and I'll appear the other end. Okay, so but then you've left the first place because you've appeared at the other end. Yeah, so it's not that kind of a portal. It's not a gate that you move through into another space. It's more of a place that you can dwell in, you can inhabit in some way, and be in both places at once. So this, I think, it's something that I find really interesting, and it was in that Melt Me Into the Ocean walks that we did, where the feet are on the earth, the ears are underwater. Yes, we're listening to the Monterey Bay, but we're walking along the edge of the beach there. So it's to be in more than one place at once and to experience a multi-layered, simultaneous, uh, that kind of experience. Um, and not just a technologically induced one, but an experientially space that might happen. So that might sound a bit abstract, but it is abstract. But also I feel like it's it's really good. I don't like
Well,
sample.
that's definitely a mind bender that'll take you places for
Yeah,
sure. And it immediately evokes to me quantum fields and these ideas of moving through space simultaneously and having
yeah,
maybe some other people involved. It could be
yeah,
an interesting journey. I really look forward to seeing where that takes us and where you take us with that one,
yeah.
what kind of portal you'll come up with. This was such a joy. I really, really enjoyed every minute talking to you and having a much more kind of rich idea of where all these ideas came from on your path and how you had this persistence of vision, even if you didn't know where you were going. You just had the trust in your own kind of inner gut feeling. And I love that. I think a young artist should really pay attention to that and not think about too much what's expected of them or what seems to fit or not fit, because a lot of times what you do 20 years ago suddenly fits, suddenly makes
Hmm.
sense. And coming back to Sun Ran Sun seemed also kind of a logical thing that made much more sense to me. That's when we met. That's when
Yes,
we met.
yes,
Yes, and we meet
yeah,
again.
yeah.
And, it's wonderful to cross paths and to see how we all intersect and move along and support each other. So I'm really appreciative of your work and just having you in my realm of people that I talk to and touch base with. Thank you so
Well,
much.
Victoria, that's one thing that I really appreciate with you and your work is that you have this way of opening up to so many people, and it never seems to be just you as the isolated artist, but much more community oriented, and that's so valuable in the arts, and I'm so appreciative of that,
Well,
of your
thank you.
work in that. So as a model for anyone still listening, as a model for how to work as an artist, I think Victoria Vesna has it. You have it down.
Well, again, I totally relate to your story. You just follow your gut, and a lot of times it makes no sense to anybody around you, but somehow it all makes sense after a while. And having people who are like-minded and friends who support that, even though they understand that there's nothing to be even understood at that point. It's a real gift. So I think back to
Yeah,
Pauline, instead of thinking of your career, think of your community.
yeah.
That's the
I
way.
it had great joyous expressions from people, you know, mothers around here. I have a child and who I hand a whale bubble to and say, "Is this a whale
Yeah.
bubble?" And just to
And they
they're
immediately
so
get it, right?
yeah,
Like, oh yeah.
and they're just so patient with me. So, oh, what is she doing now? And that kind of joy, I think, is really important in in keeping going.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. Give me your hands.
Thank you. There they go.
There they go. Take care.